Today's Hitched to Homicide episode covers the sensitive subjects of child rape and murder. Listener discretion is advised. One man claimed responsibility for over 70 murders across America. For 20 years, he killed not for financial gain or revenge, but simply to kill for the rush of it. Murdering only to leave town immediately, he left a ghost of a trail for decades until a 10-year-old girl would take him down. This is Lynn Sells, the coast-to-coast killer. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Podorf. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And
oh no,
for our Romanian friends,
oh my gosh.
Bine venit. There you go.
All right.
For our Romanian friends.
Okay.
And I'm sure I butchered that, but...
You know, I feel like we butcher all of them, but the whole point is we're so glad you're here.
Yep.
Welcome to the show. We're glad you're here. I've been waiting to do this case. There's so much in this case. You're going to have to walk the dog a couple of times on this one. I'm going to get through all of it. I really seriously contemplated cutting it into two pieces, but nobody seems to like those.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to do that.
No cliffhangers.
Just hang on. And if you've got to do a little bit of driving over the Thanksgiving holiday, this would be a good one to listen to.
Yeah.
So if you want to wait and listen to it a little bit later, you can do that too.
There you go.
If you haven't joined the In-Laws and Outlaws, all you have to do is go to Facebook. It's our closed Facebook group. We love it in there. So much fun. Answer the questions. You're in. We're getting all kinds of great reviews. Tell your friends. Be sure to like, rate, and review the show.
Yep.
We are just off to the races. So happy, and we're glad you guys are here with us. Before I get started on this case today, I want to thank some sources: ThoughtCo, Wikipedia, Murderpedia, the St. Louis Dispatch, Criminal Minds Fandom, ClarkProsecutor.org, the Lexington Herald Leader, Seekers Crime, the Springfield News Leader, Most Evil, Cold-Blooded Killers on Investigation Discovery, and Through the Window, the terrifying true story of cross-country killer Lynn Sells by Diane Fanning.
Well, let's do it.
Lynn Sells and his twin sister, Tammy Jean, are born in Oakland, California on June 28, 1964. His mother is Nina Sells. Now, on paper, his father is an insurance salesman, William Sells, but it's thought that Tommy's real daddy's name was Joe Lovins.
He was just an average Joe.
Yeah, well, he's a used car salesman.
Okay.
One thing that Tommy did learn from Joe was this phrase, "Dead men tell no tales."
Oh.
And this is an old phrase and not just used by the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right.
Pirates of the Caribbean, whichever way you want to say it.
Right.
I always say the Caribbean, but I know it's Caribbean.
All right.
I actually did a little digging on this one, and a Persian poet known as Sadi, as well as Sheikh Sadi of Shiraz, who wrote about this in 2015, said, quote, "So I finished the rogue, notwithstanding his walls, with stones for dead men, as you know, tell no tales."
Wow.
End quote. So all the way back to 1250.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gee whiz.
But I digress.
Okay.
I digress.
All right.
But Tommy has 3 other siblings when he and his twin sister are born. His mother will have 2 more after these 2 are born. They're all boys except for his twin sister. And when they're barely a year old, the family moves to Utah, living there briefly before moving to St. Louis, Missouri. And it's while they're in St. Louis that Tammy Jean contracts spinal meningitis.
Ooh.
And she would give it to Tommy, and he would survive, but Tammy Jean did not survive.
Yeah, that stuff's nasty.
Now, soon after Tommy is better, his mother sends him to live with his great aunt, Bonnie Walpole, in Holcomb, Missouri. And by all accounts, this is where Tommy had the best 3 years of his life. So his best years are from 1 to 3, or from 3 to 5. Yeah.
His best years are behind him.
Yeah, easily, early on.
Wow.
According to Aunt Bonnie, Tommy's favorite activity was to ride his tricycle up and down the sidewalk. And his mother never came to visit him in all that time. And when Aunt Bonnie wanted to make it official and adopt Tommy, Nina Sells shows back up again and takes her son back. And when he makes it home to be with his mother, he's left to fend for himself. And Nina, his mother, will not allow Aunt Bonnie to ever see Tommy again.
Wow.
Now, by the time Tommy is 7, he's skipping school and being defiant. His mother does not care. He starts drinking his grandfather's hidden booze. Does everybody have a grandfather who hides their booze? I've read that in more than one account. Whatever Tommy thought was the right thing to do, he did the opposite. He went out of his way not to conform to what a 7-year-old should be doing. At 8 years old, Tommy meets a man named Willis Clark. He lives a town over from him in Frisbee, Missouri. But Tommy would begin to spend lots of time with Willis because Willis pays him attention. He starts spending his nights there, and Willis buys Tommy expensive gifts, and he takes him on outings, and he gives him pocket money. And in return, you guessed it.
Here it comes.
He's sexually molesting Tommy.
Yeah.
And he's going to do this for years. Clark will eventually be caught. And he's been molesting not just Tommy, but other kids. He's never going to be charged with this offense.
Why?
He's never, I guess they don't have enough on him. He's just never charged with it.
Jeez.
I also read that Tommy's mom knew what was happening and consented to her son being used by Willis.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. I did read it in more than one source. Now, by the time Tommy is 10, he's smoking what's called ditchweed, or marijuana that grows wild. We have a lot of that in Kentucky. It has a lower THC level because it was grown initially for hemp. Then in 1973, when he's 11, his real father, his biological father, Joe Lovins, passes away. And this apparently really stirs up all kinds of thoughts in Tommy's head. He tries to talk to his father during the viewing, like over the casket, but he's cut off in the middle of his little speech to his dad because his maternal grandmother takes him away and tells him to, quote, stop it, end quote.
Wow.
So they're not very emotionally supportive of this child.
It's not a compassionate group.
It's not.
Yeah.
From 10 to 13, Tommy stays in trouble. At 10, he's stopped going to school and could barely read or write. When he's 13, Tommy climbs into bed with his grandmother. But Tommy's naked.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
And apparently that's the straw that broke the camel's back for Nina. And within days, she packs up Tommy's siblings and leaves Tommy alone. She leaves Tommy behind. She abandons her 13-year-old son.
Wow.
He has no idea where his mother and siblings have gone.
Wow.
Now, it's important to note that Tommy's family says that this never happened, but Tommy says that it did.
Okay.
Also in 1977, and at the age of 13, Tommy undergoes a mental examination because he's tried to rape his own mother.
Oh, wow.
In 1978, and by the age of 14, he's out on his own for sure. He's like officially out on his own. He's living on the road. He's living on the streets. He's stealing. He's doing whatever he needs to do to survive. He was filled with rage before, but now Tommy's off the hinges.
Yeah.
And according to Tommy, it's when he's still a teen that he attacks for the very first time. The first offense he has that no one knows about is when he pistol whips a girl until she is unconscious.
Wow.
How does a 14-year-old have a gun?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tommy starts drifting from town to town. He picks up odd jobs here and there, and he steals whatever he needs or desires. By the time he's 15, according to him, he's committed his first murder. And here's how the story goes. He says that he sees a man performing oral sex on a young boy through a window. He breaks into the house and kills the man. Now, there's never been any proof to back up this claim, and maybe this is what he wanted to do to his sexual molester. Maybe that was what he he wanted to do in his own mind.
Sure, yeah.
On July 5th, 1979, just outside of Port Gibson, Mississippi, Kathleen Cade phoned her husband, John, and arranged for him to meet her at their son's t-ball game at 5:30 that evening. She loaded her two sons, Richard and John Jr., into the car and left their home. The game went late, and Kathleen fell asleep in an easy chair in the living room, and when the family returned home, she awoke after midnight to find that Richard had fallen asleep in his own bed, and John Jr. were watching television in the master bedroom. And Kathleen walked down the hall to her room and climbs into bed. Then sometime during the wee hours of the morning, Tommy put a stool in front of the patio beneath the window at the front of their house. He quietly removes the screen. He climbs through the open window and lowers himself down to the floor. He doesn't make a sound. And in his pocket is a .32 caliber pistol. Tommy hid, listening to make sure that the whole family was asleep. A little while later, he moved into the kitchen. He gets a gallon of milk out of the refrigerator and just starts drinking and walking around the house.
Wow.
And then finally, he sets the milk down on the floor in the den. Kathleen hears rustling and some scuffling noises, but she didn't quite wake up. Then she hears something that sounded like popping popcorn or the sound of a car backfiring. And then her husband shouted. And now she's awake.
Yeah.
And the first thing she sees is her alarm clock. And it says that it's 3:01 a.m. Then she sees her husband, who stumbles into the bedroom, turns on the light, and says, "I'm bleeding." So he goes into the bathroom, and his terrified wife and son are watching him as he tries to wash blood off of his hands in the sink. Then he just topples backward, dead. John Cade is dead.
Wow.
Investigators are stumped. Nothing was missing from the home. They couldn't find any fingerprints. And Kathleen passed a polygraph test and was cleared. They found no reasonable explanations as to why someone would kill 39-year-old John Cade, who was the chairman of the church board and didn't appear to have any enemies. California, 1980. Tommy kills a man with an ice pick near a Chinese restaurant in Los Angeles. He doesn't stick around to see if the man is dead, but he gets picked up by the police anyway, and when he's asked by a Lieutenant Pope if he killed the man, Tommy said, "I'm sure I did."
Really?
Yeah, he said, "I've stabbed him so many times, I know he's dead." And Tommy himself was seriously injured during the fight with this ice pick because it nearly missed his spine and he had bleeding in his kidneys. And while he's lying in the hospital bed, a nurse comes in, lifts the sheets, and tries to insert a catheter.
Ouch.
But Tommy loses his shit. He's not having any of it. And this huge fight breaks out in the hospital. And then he walks out the door, AMA, against medical advice. Tommy leaves the hospital and he hitchhikes to St. Louis, where his mom is now living. It took him 49 hours to reach her home.
And this is straight out of the hospital.
This is straight out of the hospital, bleeding, hitchhiking back to his mom's place. She takes him in and she nurses him back to health. In the early 80s, Tommy lived in Little Rock, Arkansas. He spent some time at the youth home behind McClellan High School, and he and his girlfriend were renting an apartment at 6 Portsmouth Drive. But the relationship would never really last, and what you're going to see is none of the female relationships with Tommy ever really last.
Okay.
He's going to have a bunch of women who would come and go, and because of this, his mom started calling him, quote, her little whore, end quote.
Wow. Mother of the Year.
Yeah. Then in May of 1981, and at the age of 17, he's only 17.
Wow.
While his family is in Little Rock, Arkansas, he gets naked. He gets into the shower with his mother. She beats him, tells him to get out. She kicks his shins, hits him in the shoulder with her fist. She finally convinces him to get the hell out. Tommy puts on his clothes and leaves the house. He is admitted to the community mental health clinic in Jonesboro for the attempted sexual assault of his mother.
Wow.
He attended his first appointment, but was really confused about why he was there. Like, he didn't know.
It wasn't a big deal.
Not a big deal, but he says, "I don't really know why I attacked my mom, and I don't really know why it's so wrong."
And besides, my middle name is Oedipus.
And my middle name is Oedipus Lynn. And the counselors that interview him are going to realize that Tommy ain't right.
Yeah.
And it becomes very evident that Tommy had a really troubled childhood. He felt unloved. Yeah. He was unwanted. Yeah. And Tommy thought that he was the cause of all the problems in the household, and he was unhappy about his current life, and he wanted to hurt someone else in order to relieve his pain. This is how he's feeling at 17 years old.
Jeez.
He tells his counselor that he smokes pot and he abuses alcohol and he suffers from aggression, conduct disorders, and his counselor says, well, you've been under-socialized and we want you to attend therapy. And Tommy attended 5 sessions, and then on June 18th, 1981, he called and canceled the 6th appointment, and he never returned.
Because he was cured.
Yeah, I just think he doesn't want to go.
Yeah, of course.
On March 27th, 1982, at the age of 18, Tommy is arrested in Little Rock, Arkansas for public intoxication. Later in 1982, while still in Arkansas, Tommy has a son with a girl named Cindy Hannah. Cindy apparently was his first love. And her family doesn't really like Tommy for lots of reasons, including the fact that he had stolen from the church where they all belong.
Yeah, you don't do that.
Yeah, God doesn't like ugly.
Yeah. Families, they sort of frown on that kind of thing.
Yeah. Also in 1982, Tommy sneaks up to a house in a wooded area. He's planning on breaking in and stealing whatever he can find in this house, but the owner is home. His name is Hal Atkins. And when Tommy breaks in and he's caught in the act, Tommy runs from the scene. Hal follows him, and then without warning, Tommy turns around and shoots him.
Wow.
Hal falls to the ground, and he holds his breath. He's pretending to be dead, and Tommy thinks he's killed this man, and he walks away. Now, Tommy has also claimed that another unconfirmed murder took place when he and an accomplice kidnapped a woman 7 miles southwest of Little Rock. They took this woman down a dirt road to a 100-foot bluff that overlooked a quarry. They tormented her. They raped her. They killed her. And then they threw her into the water. This has never been confirmed.
Okay.
Then in 1983, Tommy doesn't move around very much. He lives near St. Louis, Missouri in Breckenridge Hills. His police records show that he received 3 traffic tickets in the area that year. That's a very good year for Tommy.
Yeah, traffic tickets. It's the least of his problems.
Yeah. Then on July 21st, 1983, when Tommy is just 18 years old, a man who matched his description was seen leaving the home of Thomas and Kaylene Gill. Now, Kaylene and Thomas lived with their 2 children in the west end of St. Louis. They were the owners of a beauty salon, and they had bought a fixer-upper in Washington Terrace in January of 1983. And that night, Thomas pulled into the driveway, and he saw a man who looked like Tommy leaving his home. And when he went inside, he discovered the bloody bodies of his wife and his 4-year-old daughter, Tiffany. He ran upstairs to check on his 1-year-old son, Sean, who is unharmed and still sleeping peacefully in his crib. And Thomas Gill thinks it's a robbery gone wrong because their neighborhood had had lots of break-ins, but his wife was still wearing her diamond ring. And the police are really suspicious of Thomas.
Yeah.
The husband, because he had just purchased a $600,000 life insurance policy on his wife 3 weeks prior to her murder.
Boy. Wow.
But there was no evidence that he was ever guilty, and Thomas Gill is never arrested. His wife and baby girl were both bludgeoned to death. On May 5th, 1984, Tommy steals a car. And then on May 8th, he is arrested by the Scott County Sheriff's Department in Benton, Missouri for stealing said Ford Mustang. He pleads guilty and is sentenced to 2 years in a state penitentiary. While he served his sentence, his daughter is born.
Okay.
Now, part of the reason I'm telling you about the murders, no one knows that he's doing this. He keeps getting picked up for small things like stealing a car, and he's going to go to jail. But they're going to let him out over and over and over, and he's going to kill over and over and over. You're going to be really frustrated about this.
Wow.
On February 18th, 1985, Tommy is paroled. A few months later, in July of 1985, Tommy steals another car and drives to Rolla, Missouri, where he abandons it at a donut shop. Then on July 19th, he checks into the New Horizons Rehabilitation Center, 15 miles north of where he left the car. And 3 days later, his mother tells police where he is, and an officer interviews him about the car theft. And now Tommy's worried that he's going to have to go back to prison. So he leaves the rehab center and takes a job working as a carny in Forsyth, Missouri. He up and leaves. He's going to roll with the carnival.
Wow.
And I remember as a kid, my mom saying, I'm going to sell you to the gypsies. You're going on the carnival. You're going on the carnival tour. I guess that's when I was really bad. But just a few days later on Friday, July 26, 1985, Ina Court and her son Rory were going to the fair in Forsyth. Rory was going to be turning 5 in just 8 days. He was excited because he was going to start kindergarten in the fall, but he was even more excited because he's going to the fair.
And of course.
Ina was described as small, she was pretty, and she had dark hair and dark eyes. She's divorced and she works as a janitor, and she also works at a car wash. So a hardworking single mom.
Sure.
That night at the county fair, she chats up a man by the Ferris wheel. The guy who's working the carny, who's working the Ferris wheel. And she's thinking that it's harmless. But it's not harmless because it's Tommy Sells.
Yeah.
And Ina invites Tommy back to her trailer. And these two have sex. And Tommy falls asleep. And when he wakes up to get up and go to the bathroom, he finds Ina looking through his backpack. And Tommy flies into a rage. He grabs Rory's baseball bat from the hallway and beats Ina over the head on the arms and across the back. According to Tommy, she screamed, she begged, she prayed for someone to help, but no one was coming.
Wow.
And Tommy notices that little Rory is standing in the doorway, watching him beat his mother to death.
No.
And not being satisfied with just beating Ina, Tommy grabbed one of her kitchen knives and slit her throat, ending it all. And because his dad, Joe, had said, dead men tell no tales, Tommy grabbed little Rory and dragged him into the living room. He beat him over the head with the baseball bat the entire time he's dragging him. Then he slits little Rory's throat just like he had his mother's. Then he proceeded to wipe away all the fingerprints and evidence he had left behind.
That's just
brutal.
Oh my gosh, I don't even have words.
When Tommy was finished cleaning up, he gathered his belonging. He takes Rory's bat with him. He's forced his way out through this rarely used back door on the mobile home, and he leaves in the middle of the night. And because he was working for this carnival and carnies disappear all the time, he didn't go back and nobody gave a shit.
Yeah.
Ina and Rory's bodies would lay in their home for 3 days before somebody finds them. On July 30th, 1985 at 7 p.m., her parents find their daughter and their grandson. Little Rory was buried on his 5th birthday. Ina did have another child, an 8-year-old daughter named Peggy, and she was alive because she was spending summer vacation visiting her father.
Lucky girl.
Then on September 4th, 1985, high and drunk driving, Tommy's caught with 2 underage girls in his car. He loses control of the whole vehicle, flips it, rolls it 3 times. All 3 of them walked away with only minor injuries.
Really? Wow.
Well, I mean, isn't that usually the case when drunk drivers kill? They walk away and the sober people are the ones that are killed.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, it was just the one car. But Tommy's arrested for driving under the influence, and he has charges related to the underage girls. 30 days later, the court dropped all the charges for the girls and sentenced him to time served.
Really?
Yeah. So this is a guy who's brutally killed, like just weeks before has brutally killed this mom and son. He's already killed a whole family, and yeah. Wow. And the bodies just keep stacking up. And they keep picking him up for these little ticky-tacky things. Not that this is ticky-tacky, but they keep, in comparison, it is.
Yeah.
But 30 days later, the court dropped all the charges and sentenced him to time served. But then on October 15th, his parole officer is like, yo,
yeah,
we're revoking your parole.
Right.
And he had to go back to the Missouri State Penitentiary. He is released on May 16th, 1986. His full sentence had been served. He is now 20 years old. And I just wanted to give you this reference because he's done a lot in those 20 years.
Yeah.
When he's out of prison, he takes a job with Atlas Towing in St. Louis. According to Tommy, he said that while he was working for Atlas, he got a phone call from a sex worker whose car had broken down. When he arrived at her car, he suggested that instead of paying for the towing costs, she could just have sex with him. And when she says, nah, I'm good. No, thank you. Tommy shoots her and throws her into the river.
Good grief.
It's also in 1986, while he's still working for this towing company, that he's repairing a car around 5 minutes from the Arch of St. Louis in downtown St. Louis. Tommy said that the owner of the car kicked him, so he pulled out his gun and shot him, leaving him for dead. Before he could get out of the area, he was arrested for stealing the light bar from a tow truck, but then the charges are dropped.
What?
And he leaves town and heads to Texas, where he takes a job on a fishing boat, Gulf Team Shrimp, for 30 days at a time. He hates this job on the boat. All I could think of was Bubba Gump Shrimp.
That's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah. When he gets back on land, he says bye-bye to the sea. He did not like it. On October 15th, 1986, Tommy goes back to prison on a parole violation when he's picked up for drunk driving. Again. When he's out, April 1987, he hops onto a freight train and rides as far north as he can possibly go and gets off the train close to Niagara Falls. Now, these are just freight trains, and they run through Lexington, Kentucky, and he's going to come to Lexington, Kentucky, which is where Rob and I live.
Yeah. Wow.
So he's going to come through here, but that's what he's doing. He's just hopping on these freight trains when they've stopped, and he's catching a ride. May 1st, 1987, when Tommy is 24 years old, he sees Susan Quartz having a little fight with her boyfriend, Michael Mandel. She leaves the bar angry and heads in a direction that's not toward her home. When she's not seen again, police list her as a missing person. She never shows up at work. Her credit cards and her bank account are untouched. She doesn't get in touch with her family. Police search the waterways and the canal around Niagara Falls, but come up empty-handed. Almost 8 years later, in 1995, Susan's body will be found when a worker is sent to clear debris from a hillside with a 60-foot drop. He thinks he's picking up a piece of trash, but then realizes it's a human skull.
Oh, wow.
Susan's body is found 800 feet from the canal near a railroad trestle buried inside a shallow grave. So there's too much decomposition to know exactly what happened to her that night. But then 2 days later, on May 3rd, 1987, after Susan has disappeared 2 states away, Tommy wakes up covered in blood. So he heads west from Niagara Falls. He heads west. He stops in Humboldt County, Nevada, and the small town of Winnemucca. He takes a job for a roofing company, but he's not making enough money to cover his expenses, and he passes a bad check on October 28th, 1987. 2 days later, he steals a bank bag and a handgun from one of the company trucks, and he uses his boss's credit card to rent a hotel room to be with a woman, to be with a sex worker.
Wow. He's a busy boy.
Also in Winnemucca, Stephanie Stroh is a 22-year-old girl. She's a college student at Reed College in Oregon. She's a longtime resident of San Francisco, California, and she had just returned home from a 10-month trip around Europe and Asia. When she gets back to the United States, she decides that she's going to hitchhike across the United States with her friend. These two travel as far as Salt Lake City together, and she calls home to speak with her mom, who is tracking her trip cross-country. Then the next day, she's at a Motel 6 in Winnemucca. There are no rooms available, and she asks where there might be any rooms in Reno further down the road, down Route 80.
Okay.
Stephanie is beautiful. I read in the newspaper she was, quote, well endowed. I hate saying that. She had sun-bleached brown hair. She was wearing, quote, hippie clothing and carried an orange sleeping bag roll with a gray backpack. She stuck out her thumb on Route 80 to hitchhike only to find Tommy Sells driving up.
Yeah.
She asked him where he was going, but it didn't matter because Tommy would have told her he was going anywhere she wanted to go.
Right.
And Stephanie gets into the car. Tommy tells Stephanie that he has acid, and he asks her if she wants to drop it with him. And she doesn't think twice. She's hitchhiking across the country. She's experimenting with drugs. She's finding herself. And while they're high on LSD in the middle of the desert, Tommy chokes Stephanie to death. In the stolen truck he's driving, there is a wash tub and a bag of concrete. And he puts Stephanie's feet in the tub, mixes up the concrete, and leaves her hanging off the tailgate of the truck all night long so the concrete can harden.
Good grief.
Then in the next morning, he drags her body and everything that she owns to a 30-foot wide hot spring in the middle of the desert. He drops her in feet first and drives out of the desert.
What an animal.
Now, when Stephanie hasn't arrived home and hasn't called, her mother and stepfather call the Winnemucca Police Department and file a missing person report. And when the police find out she's been hitchhiking across the country, they're thinking to themselves, she's been picked up. She's been taken across state lines.
Yeah.
So they call the FBI. Stephanie's family searches extensively on their own. They offer a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Stephanie. I loved this part because I have a best friend who is a psychic medium. They hire a psychic medium to help them in their search, and they are told they could find her body at the bottom of a mine or a well in eastern Nevada near a town with 4 syllables in the name. And Battle Mountain and Winnemucca both fit that description.
Yeah, they do.
The psychic told him that there would be a white building and a strip mine nearby, and also says that she sees Stephanie's feet in concrete.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah,
pretty specific.
very accurate.
Yeah.
Catherine is accurate like this. She's scary good. But by November 2nd, Tommy Sells had already left Nevada, and he's now in Illinois in just a matter of days. He's riding the freight train cars. He jumps off the train in Ina, Illinois, near Route 57, and it's here that he happens upon a trailer with a for sale sign. And Tommy sat in the dark watching this house and waiting. He's just drinking beer and watching this trailer. And he goes up to the house with a gun that he's stolen in Nevada. It's in his hand, and Tommy knocks on the door. And Keith Dardeen opens the door and asks Tommy, "What do you want? What are you doing? What do you want?" And Tommy said, "I'm interested in buying the mobile home." And Keith lived in this home with his wife, Ruby Elaine, and their 3-year-old son, Peter. Ruby Elaine was also pregnant. Keith tells Tommy that they're not interested. I mean, who comes to your house late at night asking about buying your home out of the blue?
Yeah.
And he's on foot, too, so no car. Keith tells him, no, thank you. He starts to close the door, but Tommy throws himself into the open door and pushes it back while drawing his gun and pointing it at Keith's head. Keith shouts at Ruby to get out of there with their son, but Tommy grabs little Peter and points the gun at his head. Tommy tells Keith to tie up his wife and son, but Keith is like, I don't have any rope. There's nothing to tie him up with. But Tommy finds a roll of duct tape. And without moving the gun away from little Peter's head, Tommy binds the little boy's feet, mouth, and hands with the tape. And then he drags little Peter with him and orders Ruby Elaine, the mother, to the floor, and then he does the same to her. And Tommy tells Keith that he would kill his wife and child if he didn't do exactly as he said. And with a gun to his head, Keith drove his car a mile away and into an empty field with Tommy riding shotgun. After Keith struggles with Tommy, Tommy shoots him in the cheek. Then Tommy drags Keith's body from the car, throws him onto the ground. He unzips Keith's pants. Guys, just hang on.
What?
He pulls out his genitals and cuts them from his body. Then he shoots him twice, once in the side of the head and once in the side of the face.
That's just, wow.
No, it's going to get worse. I'm giving you a trigger warning right now.
Right.
And that's why we gave you a trigger warning at the beginning of this podcast. It's going to get worse.
Well, I'm holding Scotty right now, so I have my emotional rescue
You have
dog.
your emotional support dog?
Support dog, yes.
Send him into the studio. Send him into the sound booth. Tommy gets back into Keith's car and drives back to the mobile home. And when he arrives, he unbinds Ruby Eileen's feet so he can rape her. She is pregnant. He used scissors to cut off her clothes. And when she struggled, he threatened to kill her little son if she didn't cooperate. Instantly, she's still and she accepts the rape without a sound. But little Peter is crying and he's screaming and moaning. And Tommy said he couldn't take it anymore. So he stops raping the mother, Ruby, and raises a baseball bat and bashes in the toddler's head.
Jeez.
All of this trauma causes Ruby Eileen to go into labor. And a baby girl is born right in front of Tommy Sells' eyes.
Oh, my God.
And according to him, he just watched it happen. And then he picked up a knife. He sliced into her breast. He took the baby and bludgeoned the baby to death with a baseball bat. And then he went back to Ruby Eileen and fractured her skull with the bat. And as her final breath was leaving her body, he sexually assaulted her with a baseball bat and left it lodged inside her.
This guy's just pure evil.
He is so sick and so evil.
Depraved.
And he's going to walk around the United States crisscrossing it for 20 years.
Wow.
Tommy then carries the bodies of all three of them into the master bedroom and puts them in the bed very carefully. He removes all the duct tape from their bodies. He stuffed the pieces of the duct tape into his pockets, and he cleans up after himself, wiping down all the surfaces so he wouldn't leave fingerprints. And he also cleaned up puddles of blood and sanitized all areas where he had touched anything. It's a very slow and meticulous process. Then he gets into Keith's blood-spattered 1981 Plymouth and heads south. Keith does not show up for work the next day, and the sheriff's office is eventually called, and Keith's dad drives to Ina to meet with the authorities because he's got a house key.
Okay.
And what they discover is there's only one adult in the bed with little Peter, the toddler, and the newborn, but Keith is missing. So Keith becomes a suspect. But no matter what the authorities try to say, Keith's family is like he would never commit this crime. And late the following night, after the bodies are found, hunters actually find Keith's body. His car was found later. Tommy parked it near the police station in Benton, Illinois,
Wow.
about 11 miles from the trailer where he had killed everyone.
Wow. He's got some cojones.
Tommy gets out of the area quickly and takes a job in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Then in January of 1988, when he is 24, he is arrested again for stealing a car. But 9 months later, he's out of jail and headed north to New Hampshire, where 11-year-old Melissa Ann Tremblay disappears in Salem. She's last seen in a convenience store parking lot talking to a man who fits the description of Tommy. Her body will be found face down on the railroad tracks between two trains in Lawrence, Massachusetts on September 12th. She had been sexually assaulted before she was stabbed to death. There were signs that she had struggled with her attacker, but the problem was a slow-moving freight train had rolled across her little body and had destroyed most of the evidence of the killer.
Gosh, that's sad.
A couple months later, Tommy is in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he convinces a woman and her 3-year-old son to help make money by panhandling. He put them on the streets by his side with signs that read, "Homeless and hungry, please help." And he showed this little boy how to make sad faces and sad smiles. And in a few weeks, they had enough money to go on a road trip in the back of a stolen Dodge van.
Okay.
And when they make it to Idaho to spend the night along the Snake River, Tommy killed them both and dumped their bodies in the river. He walked away with all the money she and the little boy had made begging.
Unbelievable.
Then Tommy heads south again, crossing paths with a homeless man named Kent Allen Lawton. Kent's 51 years old. Tommy sold Kent some weed, but when Kent couldn't pay, Tommy waited until night fell, snuck into his sleeping quarters where he found him with another man, and using a pocket knife, Tommy stabbed him and cut his throat. A 12-year-old boy will find the body 2 days later. A week later, on Christmas Eve, Tommy is arrested for assault, but he's released when the victim doesn't file a complaint.
Why didn't the victim file a complaint?
Don't know.
Wow.
Just never showed up to file the complaint.
Oh.
Tommy heads north on Interstate 5 and makes a stop in Berkeley, California. And according to him, a drug deal went bad. A sex worker whom he thought was a woman turned out to be a man, so he killed her.
Whoa.
Police will find her unidentified body right where he said he left it, just north of Lake Tahoe in a little town called Truckee. I've also read that it was the other way around, that he thought he was going to see a woman and it turned out to be a man, or that he thought he was going to see a man and it turned out to be a woman.
Gotcha.
But he heads to Colorado a couple months after that and keeps going north until he reaches Roseburg, Oregon, which is just an hour south of Eugene. And here he will work for a small woodcutting business and lived at a local couple's home. Someone had him living in their house.
Yeah, there's some decisions in your life that you look back on and go, I probably shouldn't have done that.
Well, he fits the psychopath.
Yeah.
You know, he's charming.
Sure.
He's nice. He's unassuming. Like he's got some problems. He likes to drink. He likes to dabble in drugs.
But we can fix him.
Yeah, I don't know. He's not fixable.
Yeah.
This is a broken man.
Yep.
And in a different sense of the way you would think of a man being broken, he's broken.
Yeah.
While he's in Roseburg, he's going to murder 2 people. While chopping trees into firewood, he kidnaps a girl with long hair who's in her 20s. He raped her and he murdered her. Then on May 9th, he meets a hitchhiker heading to Washington State. When she tried to take his drugs, he murdered her too, leaving both of their bodies in the forest where he was cutting these trees.
Wow.
But later that day, on May 9th, he's arrested for second-degree theft because he stole $30 from the firewood stand. These are the things he's getting caught for. That's why it's so frustrating.
Wow.
15 days in the clink in Roseburg, and he's out again. He heads to Arkansas, and on August 16th, 1989, when he's 25 years old,
Jeez.
He's charged with theft and arrested in Little Rock. But a few days later, the charges are dropped, and he's out again.
Jeez.
So this time he heads back to Oakland, California for a brief stint, and then to Montana for a short visit with a woman in Missoula. Then he heads back to Oakland, and he's there when the earthquake hits on October 17th, the Game 3 of World Series.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was a 6.9er.
Yeah.
And Giants and the Oakland A's were. I remember this so well.
Yeah, so
I was
do I.
not in California. I was in Princeton, New Jersey, but everybody remembers this.
Yep.
Tommy is shooting up heroin when the earthquake happens. So he's high and he's in the middle of this earthquake.
Wow.
And it scares the shit out of him because he doesn't know what's going on. And after that, he heads to Reno, where he is arrested in Carson City and placed in a detox center for 30 days.
Okay.
So he keeps getting picked up for drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
But when he gets out, he ODs on heroin, and this time he's hospitalized in Phoenix for 2 days.
Wow.
Then in January of 1990, he goes to Salt Lake City where he's arrested for possession of cocaine, but then he's released because they discover it's not cocaine.
What was it?
I don't know. How do you get picked up for coke and then it's not coke? And all I could think of was Rob loves to watch the shows where people are trying to get drugs through the airport. What's that called?
To Catch a Smuggler.
To Catch a Smuggler. And the places these people put drugs is just mind-boggling.
And they're so stupid because they're going to get caught.
And they're always like, if this turns blue, man, you're screwed. It's cocaine. So maybe back then they didn't have the little test to see if it was cocaine. Maybe he's just carrying around, Domino's sugar or whatever.
Baking soda.
He's got something else. But they release him because it's not cocaine. So he promptly steals a pickup truck and is soon arrested for said stolen truck and for public intoxication.
Jeez.
He serves 16 months of a 2-year sentence in the Wyoming State Penitentiary. But first, he's sent to the Wyoming State Hospital for a 30-day mental evaluation. Praise Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone has looked and said, okay, this guy needs a little bit more. The problem is, he's all over the place.
Well, I was going to say, he's traveling all over the country, and this was 1986?
He doesn't stay anywhere too long. This is now 1990.
Oh, it's 90. Okay, I lost track of what. Yeah, we can keep up with this guy.
It's hard, and I'm trying to go chronologically. But so finally he gets to Wyoming, and they're like, maybe we need to look at this guy.
Yeah.
And here's what his mental evaluation said. Tommy Sells is a well-nourished, well-developed 25-year-old white male who looks like Charles Manson with his black beard, shoulder-length brown hair, and dirty complexion. And he does look a little bit like Charles Manson. I will post pictures of him.
Okay.
The doctor listed Sells' mood as flat. He described his thoughts as bizarre. He said that he stated that he heard the tattoos on his arms, which were a bird, a wolf, and a dragon. His tattoos are talking to him, telling him to do things.
Wow.
Dr. Winkler, one of his doctors, concluded that Sells did not understand that anything was wrong with him and that his outlook was, quote, poor, end quote. I think that's an understatement.
Yeah.
Another doctor, Dr. Heinbecker, issued a diagnosis of depressive disorder, severe alcohol and drug dependency, and personality disorder with antisocial, borderline schizoid features.
Okay.
And after evaluation, that he needed something to control his tremors, and he needed an antipsychotic.
Okay.
On March 12th, he goes to the emergency room because he's having an anxiety attack. 6 days later, he's back again because he's having a reaction to the medication they put him on. And once they get this under control, Tommy becomes a model prisoner, and he completed a 265-hour course in barbering and worked in the leather shop as an outside trustee at the Wyoming Conservation Camp.
Really?
So they get his mental they get the mental chemistry in his head correct.
Right.
And he's able to do this.
Okay.
And remember, all this time they're doing this and they're like, he's doing so great. They think he's just a thief and a drug addict. They don't know that he has been killing people all these years as he's been wandering across America.
Right.
He is released from prison in January of 1991. And by December 9th, Tommy is back to his evil ways. Marianna, Florida. 25-year-old Teresa Hall goes to the Christmas parade with her 5-year-old daughter, Tiffany. Doesn't it seem odd that so many times it's a parent with a child? He seems to pick on families.
Yeah.
What does that say about him?
Well, he's projecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she takes her daughter, her 5-year-old daughter, Tiffany, to this parade. And when they get home, Teresa gets Tiffany ready for bed. Their house is about 100 feet from the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
The front door is kicked in and Tommy starts raging through the house. He picks up a table and smashes it to the floor and then uses one of the table legs to beat Teresa to death. Tiffany sees everything, and so she is also bludgeoned to death soon after. Tommy leaves the house, still holding the table leg in his fist. These two are found the next day by Teresa's stepfather and her husband, who had been away in Georgia for work. Now, here's the thing. There's another railway killer crossing the United States at the same time. His name is Angel Maturino Resendez.
Okay.
And after he's captured, well, let me back up. Angel actually murdered someone here in Lexington.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And we did a Kentucky Fried Homicide on this case.
Oh, yeah.
And when the Texas Rangers pick him up, they're thinking, okay, maybe he's the one who killed Tiffany and her mother, Teresa.
Yeah, because they still don't have any idea that...
How many people he killed.
Yeah.
But Tommy has said, nope, don't take that one away from me. That was me.
Oh, wow.
After he kills these two, he heads south and ends up in Charleston, South Carolina, where he's picked up for public intoxication. And he goes to jail for 30 days. And as soon as he's let out, they take him back on April 2nd for the same charge. And he's released again.
Wow.
So he leaves Charleston, South Carolina, and heads to Charleston, West Virginia. Tommy is now 27 years old. When he lands in Charleston, West Virginia, he's 27. And this is where he meets Fabian Witherspoon. At the corner of Washington Street and Pennsylvania Avenue, she sees him holding a sign that said, "Hungry, will work for food." Now, remember, he's already done this scam with a woman and her child who he killed. He tells her that he and his wife are living under a bridge and that his children are hungry. Fabian takes him to her house to find him some food to take back with him. She gives him 2 trash bags with food and clothing and asked if he needed anything else. He tells her that his wife is really in need of some clean underwear. So she goes back to her bedroom, and when she turns around, Tommy is standing behind her with a knife that he has taken from her kitchen. He tells her to take off her clothes. At knife point, he forces her to perform oral sex on him. Then he raped her in the floor of the bathroom. Then he forced her into the shower where he raped her again. Then he shoved her out of the shower and demanded oral sex again.
Wow.
As they struggled, she's able to get a hold of the knife. She stumbled from the bathroom to the front door, but he grabbed her and tried to manhandle her back into the bedroom. She stabs him, and he grabbed her by the wrist and regained possession of the knife. He stabbed at her, but she jumped back and received only a deep slice across her skin. She also got control of the knife again. These two wrestle around. They trade blows until finally he gets her down on the floor with him on top of her. He strapped her ankles and wrists together with tape and secured the bindings with strips of sheets from her bed. Then he raises a piano stool over his head and beats her bloody until the seat broke loose from the base.
Good grief.
Then he tries to slit her throat, but this time he panics a little bit, and the cut he made would only be superficial and require only a few stitches. He grabbed a boombox and a VCR, and he escaped from the home. He left behind the gifts, the quote, gifts, that she had stuffed into bags for him. He thinks she's dead. But as soon as Fabian becomes conscious again, she fought her way out of her bindings. She wrapped herself in a blanket. She picks up her cordless phone. She hurries outside. She calls the police.
Good grief.
Before Fabian left in the ambulance, she informs the investigators that the man who had assaulted her was Tommy Sells and that he was sleeping by the river. But he wasn't sleeping by the river. He was sharing an apartment with 3 other people, Rebecca Gibson, Curtis Sizemore, and Karen Young. And when questioned by the police, they say Tommy'd been by the apartment. He told them he'd been in a fight, and that's why he was so bloody. And when they ask where he might be, they tell police, well, where he's been for the past week, Gina Young's apartment. So another girl. Tommy gets to Gina's apartment and he calls his mom when he gets there because he's got cuts and his mother told him over the phone how to bandage them. And she tells him to go to the hospital, but instead he sends Gina out for dope and a 5th of Jim Beam.
Well, that'll work.
That's going to cure whatever, I guess. When police find him, he's got extensive internal bleeding and his kidneys and spleen had been nicked and his testicles had been nicked. You go, Fabian.
Yeah, wow. She's tough cookie.
She had sliced them and police rush him to a hospital where he recovers. Now, you would think at this point they would put him away for a good long while. This is rape and attempted murder.
Yeah.
But the DA found issues with Fabian. She had filed another sexual assault charge that wasn't prosecuted. There were these psychological reports on her that the defense was going to use, and the DA decides they're not confident they can put him away. So they decide a little jail time is better than none at all. And the sexual assault charges are dropped.
Oh, my gosh.
And on June 25th, 1993, Tommy is sentenced to a term of not less than 2 years, but not more than 10 for malicious wounding.
Wow.
And he got credit for 402 days that he had already served.
Unbelievable.
Now, while he's in prison, he meets the sister of another inmate. His name is John Price, and he meets John Price's sister, Nora.
Okay.
Nora is 26. Tommy is 28. Nora has some intellectual deficiencies, and Tommy talks her into falling in love with him. She was easy to manipulate, and he conned her out of cash every time she came to the prison to visit. Then he proposed to her, and in April of 1996, these two get hitched, and from that day forward, 75% of Nora's disability checks went to Tommy.
Yeah.
Now, it's during this prison stay that Tommy is diagnosed as bipolar. He's got every other diagnosis, so why not?
Yeah, throw another log on the fire.
He's released in May of 1997, and as soon as he's out of prison, Nora and Tommy head to Tennessee by hitchhiking and riding trains, and they settle in the town of Cleveland, Tennessee, and Tommy takes a job at a car wash. And 2 months later, he leaves Nora and goes west. And Nora goes home to West Virginia. But by the time she's heading home, Nora's pregnant. So Tommy gets his mother to take care of Nora.
Okay.
He wants his pregnant wife at his mother's house in St. Louis, Missouri, or outside St. Louis, Missouri.
Gotcha.
And he leaves her there. And by October 15th, 1997, at the age of 33, Tommy is back at it again, and this time someone else is going to take the blame. Lawrenceville, Missouri, Tommy meets Julie Ray Harper at a convenience store where, according to Tommy, she treated him rudely. So he follows her home and breaks a window. He goes to the kitchen, gets a knife, goes to the first bedroom where Julie Ray's 10-year-old son, Joel Kirkpatrick, is sleeping. He murders Joel in his sleep, stabbing him. The boy's scream wakes up his mother, and she sees Tommy, but he's got this hoodie pulled up around him. So she runs toward him and chases him through the glass doors and into the backyard, screaming for help. She trips, and Tommy hits her in the head, and she briefly sees his face in the streetlight. And she stumbles to a neighbor's home to call police, thinking that her son Joel has been abducted. She doesn't know that he is in the floor in the bedroom dead.
Oh, wow.
So Julie is taken to the ER for her injuries, including 5 stitches to her arm. She will be arrested, tried, and sent to prison for the murder of her own child.
How did they come about that?
Everything pointed to her, apparently, and she got railroaded.
Wow.
Yes. Now, before I go on, I'm referencing all kinds of cases that we've done. We did a case on Darlie Routier, and she is in jail for killing her children, and it was a masked man, and it was in Texas. And there are people who think it could be Tommy Lynn Sells.
Yeah.
2 nights later, on October 15th, Tommy abducted and murdered Stephanie Mahaney, age 13, of Springfield, Missouri. Tommy said that his van broke down in front of her apartment. He saw her playing outside, and he waited for the adults to leave. He sees a man with 3 children enter the apartment. The oldest has auburn hair and freckles and a pretty grin. This is Stephanie. Stephanie's mother wasn't at home because she was in the hospital with pneumonia, and her mom's fiancé, Rob, had taken the kids to the hospital to visit with their mom that night.
Okay.
And he comes back and stays in the apartment until they're asleep. And Stephanie was so tired she fell asleep in her clothes, like on her bed. But at 11 p.m. that evening, Tommy sees Rob leave by the back door. Rob locks the door behind him. He's going back to the hospital to check on his fiancée, the mother, Suzanne.
Okay.
And he's thinking that they don't ever go in or out of the front door, so that door must be locked. But Rob didn't check it, and the door was unlocked. Tommy slips through the front door into the home. He goes from room to room looking for his next victim. He sees the 8-year-old daughter. He sees the 9-year-old daughter, and then he finds Stephanie. And when she awakens, he immediately slaps tape across her mouth. He blocks her nose and makes it hard for her to breathe. He jerks her out of bed and drags her to the front door. Her glasses are left behind on her nightstand. She can't see without her glasses.
Okay.
He grabs her, drags her out. She doesn't have her glasses. He throws her into the front seat of his van, and Stephanie tries to escape by grabbing the door, and Tommy hits her so she'll be quiet. Then Tommy parks off of Missouri 266 on Road 99, and he injects Stephanie with a large dose of cocaine.
Oh, wow.
He pulls off her shoes and jeans, hitting her if she struggles. Tommy rapes Stephanie and then takes her life by choking her to death.
Wow.
He gathers her clothes and her body and walks toward a cow pasture where he unlatches the gate, dropping her jeans and shoes along the way. And when he reaches a pond, he drops her body in the water. When her family discovers that she's missing, of course, they file a missing persons report, but there are 26 girls in that area that are missing at that time. Yes,
Wow.
26. 38 days are going to pass without a word from Stephanie, and then on November 18th, 1997, a group of hunters are walking through a field and discover the partially clothed body of the teenager submerged in the pond.
Oh, man.
Her body was too decomposed to make a visual identification, and investigators call the families of all 26 girls to inform them that they have found this body, and they get dental records from everybody, and the body comes back as Stephanie Mahaney.
Wow.
By the end of 1997, Tommy is working for a carnival again as a Ferris wheel operator and a truck driver. On December 15th, back in Winnemucca, Nevada, Tommy stays only one night at the Overland Hotel, but before he leaves the area, he drives to the desolate location where he'd left Stephanie Stroh's body in 1978. He wants to relive that fond memory of that night.
His trophy.
Then when he leaves town that day, he never sees Nora, his wife, or his unborn child again. Nora isn't equipped to be a mother, and Tommy's family isn't willing to take care of the baby. So in April of 1998, in Jonesboro, Nora gives birth to a little boy, and he is immediately placed with a family.
Okay.
Now, before Nora has his child, Tommy is off working in a carnival in the town of Del Rio. And on the night of March 5th, 1998, Jessica Lavery brings her kids to the fair, and the kids ride the Ferris wheel, and she stands on the sidelines. And after the carnival is over for the night, Jessica invites Tommy back to her house for a drink. So it happens more than once. He's charming.
Sure.
He's chatting these women up. Tommy ends up spending the night and many other nights at her home while he finishes up his tour in Del Rio. Then the day that the carnival was ready to pack up and leave, Jessica goes to the fairgrounds, and Tommy's ready to leave with the rest of the crew. And he takes her with him on the carnival circuit because they're going to the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
So she goes with him for a couple of days. And after this little 2-day vacation by the sea, he sends her home on a bus, and she asks him to move in with her and her 2 teenage daughters and her 2 younger boys.
Wow.
And Tommy says yes. Tommy finds a job as a salesman and a mechanic. Jessica works at a Chinese restaurant waiting tables, and he's very much in love with her because he'd learned to read and write, and he was writing love poems for her. He's driving the kids to school. He's taking the boys fishing. He worked with them on projects, on school projects. He even ironed their clothes for school from time to time. They were like a little family.
This is the same guy?
This is the same guy, and Jessica is encouraging him, and Tommy does not do drugs, he does not drink alcohol, and he is going to church, Grace Community Church, where he makes friends with a used car salesman and his wife, Terry and Krystal Harris.
Okay.
That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh.
But on June 28th, 1998, Tommy heads north to Texas, and then he goes east to Beaumont. And while he's in Texas, he gets 2 traffic tickets. When he gets home in August of 1998, 20 inches of rain had fallen. There were flash floods, and Tommy and Jessica were in the water, passing children across the street.
Wow.
Tommy had said that he knew that nothing would ever be the same again after this flood. And Tommy and Jessica eventually move into a trailer 10 miles west of the original home that had been washed away. It's here that Tommy asks her to marry him. She says yes, and they are married in a church on October 22nd, 1998. Now, here's the problem. He can't be married because he's still legally married to Nora Price. He never divorces her.
Okay.
Now, these two begin to fight after they are so-called married, and her nagging turned into arguments, which turned into fights. And by February 22nd of 1999, Tommy has left Del Rio.
Tommy has left the building.
On March 30th, Tommy's in Tennessee. He took a 20-mile detour off Route 40 when he reached Jackson. Around midnight on March 30th, he approaches a small trailer, knocks on the door, and opens it, slipping inside, and finds a knife in one of the kitchen drawers. He creeps down the hall to 32-year-old Deborah Harris's room. She's living with her daughter, Ambria Halliburton, who is 8 years old. So again, mom, child.
Yep.
In the bedroom, he puts the blade to Debbie's throat as she wakes up and doesn't resist because she knows she has to be quiet if she wants her daughter to live. So Tommy stabbed her multiple times and raped her unresponsive body. Then he went across the hall to the bathroom holding the knife. He set it down beside the sink, picked up a bar of soap from a soap dish, and cleaned the blood off his hands and arms. And when he turns around, 8-year-old Ambria is standing in the hallway, and he chases her into the living room where he catches her, slams the knife into her tiny body with so much force that it lifted her off her feet. He stabbed her again, and then she went limp. Then he shoved the knife into her a third time. But at this point, he hears a noise from Debbie's room, so he goes back to the bedroom to be sure that Debbie is dead, and he stabs her one last time in the chest, leaving the knife lodged there. These two are found on Easter Sunday when a friend decides to pay a visit to Debbie's trailer. Now, before the bodies are even found, Tommy is already states away. He had been hired with a carnival in Greensboro, North Carolina, and this job will take him to San Antonio, where a 9-year-old girl would be his next victim. It's called Fiesta in San Antonio, and it's a 10-day celebration, and there's always a carnival. On April 18th, 1999, Mary B. Perez, a 9-year-old girl, went to the carnival with her family. Around 10 o'clock at night, Mary B. and her uncle go to a booth where he's going to buy a round of beer for everybody that they're hanging out with. And when they're walking back from getting the beer, her uncle doesn't realize that she has trailed off behind him. And when he turns around, Mary B. is gone. So in the middle of this carnival madness, Tommy picks Mary B. up off the road and hustles her into his truck, and he tells her, "We're going to take a little ride." Then he forces her into the floorboard. About 1.5 miles away, they come to a stop. Tommy pulls Mary B. out of the vehicle, takes her through a hole in a fence to an isolated area, and lays her on a queen-size mattress. He forcibly undresses her as she fights him. When he's finished raping her, he wraps her T-shirt around her little neck and strangles her to death. Her body will be found 10 days later after a heavy rain by a man who is fishing with his son on the Azalon Creek. Her body had washed downstream from the place where she had been discarded. Then Tommy hops on a train and travels to Lexington, Kentucky.
Oh, no.
He lives on the street for a few weeks, and he sometimes rents a home for a day or two from a woman who worked at a fast food restaurant on the street next over from the Labor Ready office. The Labor Ready office is where you can show up every single day, and they hand out jobs here in Lexington.
Gotcha.
Eventually, he finds a job at the XL Building Service and the Lexington Recycling Center, and on May 13th, he clocks in at Transylvania University.
Okay.
And if you don't know about Transylvania University, go look it up. It's a pretty cool school.
Yep.
It's extremely old, as old or older than Harvard, I believe.
Transy.
Haley McHone is 13 years old, and outside her family home, she was known to be a sunny girl. She was always kind to strangers. She always wanted to lend a helping hand. She didn't get along great with her family, and a lot of times she felt really isolated and alone. She lived near her grandmother's house, and she would walk there almost every single day. Her grandmother told her that she could move in with her after school was over. Haley liked to babysit. She would walk dogs. She would pull weeds in the neighborhood near the University of Kentucky to make extra money. And when her grandmother became ill and went into the hospital, Haley would ride her bike miles and miles to visit her every day. Now, Haley did have a stint at Charter Ridge, which is an adolescent psychiatric facility here in Lexington, Kentucky. And after that, she had been under the care of a psychiatrist, and she was taking antidepressants. The reason for her stay was that she had emotional damage caused by sexual abuse.
Yeah.
On May 13th, 1999, Haley's not in school that day because she's got an appointment with her psychiatrist. First thing that morning, she goes to her grandmother's house and she has breakfast. And afterwards, she gets on her bike and goes to the Elizabeth Street Park, where she parks her bike at the end of a set of swings, and she gets on the swing set. Watching is Tommy Sells. He sees the teenage girl on the swing. He looks around to make sure no one is watching, and then he creeps up to her. He shoves her off the swing, slaps his hand over her mouth. She struggles. Then he drags her kicking and squirming from the park to a wooded lot just behind it.
Wow.
I know exactly where this is, where this whole thing took place. Tommy demands oral sex, telling her that he wouldn't hurt her if she does it. She agrees. Tommy starts to remove his shirt, and he hears the sound of a couple walking through the park, and he put his hand over Haley's mouth to keep her quiet. And she doesn't struggle because she's thinking, I'm going to be safe if I don't put up a fight.
Right.
Remember, she's a survivor of sexual molestation.
Right.
When the couple is out of the way and out of earshot, Tommy yanked off Haley's clothes, pushed her onto the dry leaves where he raped her. Again, she did not struggle, thinking that he would leave her alone when he was finished. But he didn't just use her and walk away like her previous molester had done. Tommy strangled Haley with her own shirt, twisting it tight around her neck. When he was finished, Tommy pushes Haley into a depression in the ground and shovels debris over her body. He takes her bike and pedals away into another area of Lexington, where he sells her bike for $20.
Gee whiz.
When Haley misses her doctor's appointment and her mom can't find her, she contacts Haley's grandmother. And the rest of the day, Haley's father and mother and 3 older siblings, they're looking around the neighborhood for her. They're walking the streets until it's dark. On the same day that he rapes Haley, Tommy Sells is arrested for public intoxication in Lexington, Kentucky. He is released the next morning.
Wow.
And as soon as he is released, he hops on the train and he is out of town. For 10 days, Haley's family and the Lexington Police Department put up posters everywhere. They searched everywhere. They followed every lead. Then one day, a man was walking his dog near the Elizabeth Street Park, and the dog picked up a scent. By the time they reached the source of the dog's excitement, the smell was overwhelming. He had found Haley's body.
That's awful.
She is 100 yards from the spot on the railroad tracks where another body had been found just 21 months before. Christopher Mayer, the 21-year-old college student who had been beaten to death and left on the tracks. His killer was Angel Maturino Resendez.
The other guy.
The railway killer.
Wow.
So everyone is thinking that Resendez is guilty of Haley's murder too, but there's no evidence to support this. But even before Haley's body is found, Tommy has been arrested again. He's picked up in Madison, Wisconsin on a drunken and disorderly charge. He was waving a box cutter around. And while he's in custody, he assaults another inmate. And after this, he gave his jailer a handmade hangman's noose and told him, I want to kill myself.
Oh, wow.
So what do? They release him on June 24th when he comes home to Del Rio, Texas. And he's thinking that he's going to slip right back in with Jessica. But one of her daughters has called the police to the house and says he's showing his face here. And Tommy is accused of molesting Jessica's daughter, Samantha. And the social worker makes it very clear that Jessica and her 4 children cannot stay there in the trailer with Tommy.
Right.
So Jessica takes her family to her mother's home. And on July 3rd, Tommy drives to Oklahoma. 14-year-old Bobby Lynn Wolford was creative, joyful, and a straight-A student. She played the trumpet and the baritone in the school band and was on the basketball team. On July 2nd, Bobby Lynn tells her mother that she's going with friends to Canton Lake in Blaine County over the weekend. Her mother gives her $10 for spending money on the trip. And now her mother's a little leery at this point because her husband had committed suicide and one of her sons had been in a horrible car accident and had survived. So this family had really gone through it.
Yeah.
It was a rough go of it.
Yeah.
On this same weekend, Tommy Sells arrives at Kingfisher. He drives up from Del Rio, drinking heavily and snorting cocaine through the day and night. He takes Route 81 north of Oklahoma City and into the town of Wacomas, where he turned and began driving south. In the early hours of July 5th, he pulls into a convenience store to inflate a leaky tire. It's 4 a.m, and after he sells some cocaine to an older couple in the parking lot, he sees this young woman. She has blonde hair, blue eyes. She's using the telephone and complaining that she can't reach anybody. Tommy asked her if he could help her, and she tells him that she needs a ride home and can't get one. And he tells her he will give her a ride and invites her into his truck.
Wow.
Now, Tommy asked her if she wanted some cocaine, and she says, I don't have any money. And when Tommy says, you have something more valuable than money, she tells him to take her back to the convenience store.
Yeah.
She's like, you can't afford that, asshole.
Yeah.
But when he backhands her across the face and tells her to shut up, Tommy drives to a dark and isolated road, then forces her to perform oral sex, fondles her, and begins trying to rape her. When she fights back, he grabs a ratchet wrench from the floor and rams it inside her.
Ugh.
Bobby Lynn opens the truck door and tries to run, but Tommy has a gun and he shoots her in the head and she falls to the ground dead.
Wow.
Now, he has to clean up his mess, so Tommy grabs her purse and duffel bag from his truck, and he throws them as far as he can. He takes the earrings she's wearing and slides them into his pocket. He removed the ratchet wrench and pulled her clothing back into place before he lifts her lifeless body, disposing it in an inconspicuous location further off the road. And then he just begins driving back to Texas.
Jeez.
She will be found 4 months later, and DNA tests will confirm that the body was actually Bobby Lynn.
Wow.
Tommy returns to Del Rio, and Jessica and her children move back in with him. After rounds and rounds of interviews, the charge that he had molested Jessica's daughter is dismissed as unfounded. Now, whether it happened or not, I don't know, but this isn't the kind of guy that I would trust around my children. Then in December of 1999, Tommy strikes again in Welch, Oklahoma. Daniel and Kathy Freeman live in a trailer with their daughter, Ashley. The trailer has electricity and phone service, but they don't have running water, and they use a wood stove for heat. Their daughter, Ashley, had just turned 16, and that night, Ashley's boyfriend brought her a present and stayed just for a bit, but Ashley's best friend is spending the night for her birthday, Laria Bible, and while everyone is asleep that night, Tommy creeps into the trailer inside and finds a gun because Ashley and her father had been hunting and there were more than 14 guns in the house.
Oh, man.
Tommy picks one, he goes into the adult bedroom where they're sleeping and rams the butt of the shotgun into the father's collarbone to get his attention. Tommy wanted to wake him when he killed him. And when Daniel opens his eyes, Tommy is pointing the gun at his head, and the gunshot that followed, a split second later, blasted his body from the bed. Wow. The second shot was to Kathy's head, and after this, Tommy disembowels her.
Oh, my gosh.
And he did the same thing to Daniel, and he cut off Daniel's arms and his right leg with an axe. In the other room, Laria and Ashley are awake, and when the second shot is heard, these two huddle in the kitchen because they're too afraid to move. Tommy is pouring gasoline in a puddle in the main room in the floor, and he splashes some of it onto the heater. And now the trailer is going up in flames, and Tommy stands in the doorway. He aims at their heads and ordered them out of the room and into the cold night. Tommy will torture both girls and then end their lives. Wow. He claims that he brought the van to a halt somewhere near Red River, and dumped the two girls in an isolated area before heading south. Their bodies, to this day, have never been recovered.
Oh, it's
Now,
sad.
Tommy Sells takes credit for these murders, saying that he dumped the girls near the Red River in the border between Texas and Oklahoma.
Right.
If you remember, we talked about these exact murders in this exact trailer when we discussed Jeremy Bryan Jones, the guy with the killer charm.
Yeah.
He has also been given credit for these murders. And remember, in that case, police think it's a drug deal gone wrong.
Right.
So was it Jeremy or was it Tommy, who was a drug dealer? That murder took place on December 30th, 1999. One night later, Tommy is back in Del Rio, Texas, and Jessica is pissed off. He'd picked up and left. He'd been gone in the van for days. He'd missed work. There were bills to be paid. These two drive to the Pico convenience store where Tommy calls Bill Highs to find out how he can pick up his final paycheck. When he's inside the store, he runs into Terry Harris, and these two chat for a little bit. Terry Harris is an auto salesman. He's a car salesman, and they go to church together. Now, when Tommy gets home, Jessica's still mad, and Tommy leaves to go to Larry's Lakefront Tavern to drink bourbon and Coke.
Okay.
Don't ruin your bourbon with the Coke. As a Kentuckian, I'm just telling you.
It's sacrilege.
Don't ruin your bourbon with a Coke. But he gets drunk, and he talks up the waitress, and he asks her for sex. And then he asks her where she lives, and then he asks her again for sex. And she's just like waving him off.
Yeah.
He and a buddy named Sonny were the last two to leave the bar at 2 a.m, and he decides he's going to go to Terry Harris's home to get some money that he thinks is owed to him. And according to Tommy, Terry had fronted cocaine to Terry in exchange for $5,000.
Oh, wow.
So after breaking into a random home on his way to Terry's, he just breaks into a random house and starts eating food out of their refrigerator.
Gee whiz.
And then when he hears somebody coming, he leaves and goes to his own house where he gets a knife. And Jessica doesn't even know that he's been home.
Wow.
Tommy stands outside the home of the Harrises. He tries to pick the lock on the front door with the blade in his hand. That didn't work. Then the family dog starts to bark. So he gives the dog his hand, lets him smell it, and then he starts petting the dog on the head, and the dog goes quiet. Scotty would lick somebody to death before he would do anything horrible.
Yep.
Then he goes to the screen from the front window above an air conditioner and pushes up the sash, but the latch is holding into place. So Tommy moves to the front of the house, to the window where 14-year-old Justin Harris is. And the window is already raised because Justin's letting a little bit of air inside the house that night.
Yeah.
He's sleeping with his window open.
Yeah.
And the window was a perfect entry point. He removed the screen, set it to the side, and eased himself into the window. And 14-year-old Justin Harris is blind. He had been blind since birth. So when he hears a noise, he thinks that his sister and her friend are teasing him, and he tells them to stop coming into his room, and he goes right back to sleep. Because that night, their daughter, 13-year-old Katy Harris, had her BFF sleeping over, 10-year-old Krystal Surles.
Okay.
And Tommy walks into the next bedroom. He uses his lighter to see who's there. And it's Krystal's little brother. He's also sleeping over.
Okay.
Then he walks down the hall to the opposite end of the trailer where he sees Krystal Harris, the mom, and Lori Harris, her 12-year-old daughter, fast asleep. And he touches Krystal's leg, the mom, and she doesn't even wake up. So he leaves her alone. He walks back down the hall to explore the final bedroom. 10-year-old Krystal Surles is in the top bunk, and Tommy freezes when he gets into the room because he can't identify the source of the noise in the room. It's too dark. He can't figure out who's in there asleep. He squeezes the knife in his hand, and in 2 steps, he's leaning over Katy Harris, who is sleeping in the lower bunk, and he tells her to wake up. And then he lays down beside her with his hand on her throat. And with the other hand, he holds a 12-inch boning knife
Wow.
to her. She asked him, "What are you doing here?" She knows who he is. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
He doesn't respond. Instead, he slits open her shorts and her panties, slits her bra, and returns the knife to her throat while his free hand fondles her. She jerks away, gets out of bed, and starts to run for the door. She's going to shout for someone. She wants someone to get her mother, but Tommy is already at the door blocking her path, and he stabbed her, cutting her.
Wow.
Tommy cut her, and he turned on the light to look at the arm where he's like pulling her to him. Then Krystal awakes from the top bunk and peeks through the bed. She's like peeking through the slats, and she sees Katy, and then she sees this man that she knows, and his hands are clasped over Katy's mouth. And without saying anything, Tommy slits Katy's throat, and Krystal watches as the blood flows down her best friend's neck.
Man.
Then Tommy pulls the knife back and slices again, deepening the wound in the 13-year-old girl's neck. He basically decapitated her. Wow. Then he loses control, and as Katy is sliding to the floor, he stabs her multiple times. And just as he's about to leave the room, his eyes meet Krystal's on the top bunk, and he becomes aware for the first time there's another little girl in this room.
Wow.
And he grabs Krystal and attempts to slash her throat, but she held her hands around to protect it. And he said, "Move your hands." And she does. She removes her hands, and he slits her throat.
Jeez.
Although in pain, bleeding, and petrified, 10-year-old Krystal knows that her best chance of survival is to play dead.
Really?
And she slumps forward and lays perfectly still in the floor.
And how old is she?
10.
Wow.
Quote, "I just remember laying there and the light turning off, and I heard the door shut. And so I got on my hands and knees, and I was crawling across the floor in the bedroom, and I came across Katy on the floor. She was kind of making a gasping noise, or maybe she was choking, but then I was trying to comfort her. I laid next to her, rubbing her back, and that's when I realized I couldn't talk because all I wanted to say was, 'Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay.' But I couldn't. And then, as soon as she stopped making those noises, I had this feeling, you got to get out of here.
Right.
Get up. Come on and go. Don't lay here. Go."
Right.
Then Tommy Sells just walks out the door, and Krystal waits, pretending to be dead, until she hears his car drive away. Then she walks out the front door. She thinks everybody in the house is dead. She walks a quarter of a mile down the street.
Wow.
To get to the next house. She goes to the home of Herb and Marlene Betts. She rings the doorbell. She waits. It's like 5 a.m. Then she starts pounding on the door, and Herb asks who's there, but Krystal can't speak because her trachea has been sliced. Her voice box has been cut.
Wow.
He turns on the light. He looks outside. He sees Krystal. She raises her chin and points to her bloody throat. And Herb immediately calls for his wife to call the police, and they bring her inside.
Right.
And the police show up at the Harris home. They wake up Krystal Harris and her daughter when they come in, and they ask, "Is anybody else in the residence hurt?" And the mom, Krystal, says, I have no idea what you're talking about, because she thinks everybody's asleep.
Yeah.
And when the officers reach Katy's room, they find her corpse. She was nude from the waist down. The cut in her neck was so very deep. They still check for a pulse. They know there isn't one.
Right.
And the family is then removed from the trailer because it's now a crime scene.
Sure.
There are pictures of the words that Krystal is writing to the police because she cannot speak. She's writing on a piece of paper frantically. She's telling them what happened to her. And there's blood smears all over these notes. I will post a picture in the In-Laws and Outlaws.
This is a 10-year-old kid.
A 10-year-old kid, a brave little 10-year-old kid. And from her hospital bed, little Krystal works with police and sketch artists and investigators, and she IDs Tommy Lynn Sells.
Yay.
Now, meanwhile, Tommy has made it home. He's washed the blood from his hands. He's changed his clothes and crawled into bed. The next day, he wakes up at noon and Jessica's already gone. He goes over to his friend Sonny's house, the guy he was with the night before. They drink beer and whiskey and snort some cocaine. Eventually, he goes home, but Jessica is angry, and she's thrown all of his clothes into the yard, and she tells him not to come back until he's sober.
Yep.
Now, police are watching Tommy like a hawk because they have no evidence, only the word of this little girl. And when Jessica allows him to come home, he goes to bed only to be woken up by the police on January 2nd. He did not resist or even ask why he was being arrested.
Really?
Yeah. Didn't
Wow.
even ask why they were arresting him.
Wow.
But he is for the death of Katy Harris and the attempted murder of Krystal Surles. And he wasn't even mad about it. He starts confessing to all of it.
Really?
He confesses to like 70 murders and all 22 murders that we have discussed. For 20 years, he crisscrossed the United States, murdering for the sake of murdering. He would kill and move on. He never used a credit card. He never had a digital footprint. He had no motive other than just to kill. He had a passion for murder. He was killing whenever he got a chance. And when they asked him about beating this baby to death, he said he didn't know why he did it.
Wow.
Quote, "The first time I did a shot of dope, it was the best feeling I'd ever had in my life. And the first time I killed somebody, it was such a rush. It was just like that shot of dope.
Gee
Every
whiz.
time I did it, it was that rush again. I started chasing that high," end quote. On September 18th, 2000, Tommy Lynn Sells pleads guilty and is convicted of the capital murder of Katy Harris and the attempted murder of Krystal Surles. Krystal went on to testify in the trial, and she insisted that Tommy Lynn Sells was present in the courtroom. This is a child, and she says, "I want him in the courtroom." Despite his request to be excused, he did not want to be there when this little girl was going to testify, and she insisted that he be there.
Good.
This little girl described the events for the jury in detail, telling them what she saw happen to her best friend.
Wow.
Tommy Lynn Sells was sentenced to death.
Yes.
On September 17th, 2003, he's indicted but never tried for the 1997 Greene County, Missouri murder of Stephanie Mahaney. The same year, he pleads guilty to strangling 9-year-old Mary B. Perez in San Antonio, for which he received a life sentence. He confessed to even more murders while in prison, including the murder of 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick, whose mother, Julia Ray Harper, was in prison for. She was freed in 2006.
Ugh, thank God.
Sells was executed by lethal injection
Good.
in the Allen B. Polunsky unit near West Livingston, Texas, on April 3rd, 2014 at 6:27 p.m. He did not get a last meal. In Texas, you don't get that privilege. You get to eat what everybody else is eating that day.
Good deal.
And he declined to make a statement. The execution was attended by the Harris family and the Perez family and Krystal Surles. And two friends of Tommy Lynn Sells also attended, and he smiled faintly at them as he entered on his gurney. And with a chaplain holding his ankle, Tommy declined to make a statement, and the injection was given. Katy's father, Terry, said that the execution was, quote, way more gentle
Yeah.
than what Sells gave out.
Yep.
So all of these years, he's picked up for all of these other drunk and disorderly, drunk and drugs, and they keep him for a little while. But all of this time, he's crisscrossing the country, murdering children, mothers and children, families. He had kind of a profile of who he was going to kill. Although he said he didn't care, he was an equal opportunity murderer.
Right.
But he really did seem to go after young children
Yeah.
and their mothers.
Yeah.
But that is the story of the cross-country killer, Tommy Lynn Sells. And that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
Man, oh man, talk about sick and depraved. I mean, that's just...
Absolutely the worst. It's why we gave you a warning at the beginning of the show. It is a horrible case, but I did want to cover it because there were a lot of victims, and I like talking about these victims. We can't forget their names. We can't forget who they are because we always know who the killers are.
Sure.
They've got shows all over the place, including a podcast, podcasts everywhere.
Yep.
So I always want to make sure that we talk about these victims.
And we do.
And our heart goes out to our fellow Kentuckians and Lexingtonians on the death of Haley. And I do know that the Lexington Police Department worked tirelessly to find everything they could about her killer.
Yep. Well, I'm exhausted. Oh my gosh, let's try to lighten it up just a little bit.
All right.
I've got a short one today, but I had to do it because just the story basis is too funny.
Okay.
All right. So let's do a little, well, bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
South Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia police are looking for an armed robbery suspect who tried and failed to disguise himself with a clear plastic bag.
Like a Ziploc bag over his head?
A clear one. Surveillance cameras captured the suspect pacing around outside the Dunkin' Donuts on the 300 block of Oregon Avenue back on July 6th.
Okay.
After a few minutes, the man decided to strike. He placed the transparent bag over his head and made a beeline for the counter. After hopping over it, the robber pulled out a knife and grabbed the box containing cash. The suspect then lost the plastic bag disguise while trying to escape. If you recognize the man behind the clear cover-up, call the South Detective Division.
Oh, they haven't caught him?
I don't know. It doesn't look like it.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, 215-686-3013 or 3014. And we'll post this on the In-Laws and
This
Outlaws.
is not where I thought that was going. I thought he was going to yank that bag off his head and stuff donuts in it. Because I do that in New York City. I have celiac disease, and when I get a gluten-free bagels in New York City and treats, I actually walk in with these huge Ziploc bags.
Well, just the fact that he used a clear, transparent bag to rob something.
He didn't even draw circles on it or a smiley face.
This is where you kind of go, well, maybe this isn't the right profession for me.
He should have drawn some pantyhose, which makes me think of Raising Arizona. Son, you got a panty on your head.
Anyway.
He couldn't even go that far.
Yeah, so there you go.
Well, if you have a bless your heart, or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, or somebody who needs to get a plastic bag off their head, you can send it to us. Go to hitchedtohomicide.com. There's a little pull-down menu. You can fill out the form. You can also suggest a case. We're getting them all the time. They are going on the list. We really, really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. Amazing.
Yep.
I've got a special podcast next week for Thanksgiving if you're going to be traveling on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so be sure to tune into that. But for today, that's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.